Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. Protesters braved the snow and wind at Winnipeg City Hall today. They were there to demand immediate closure of the city's Brady landfill to search for the victims of an alleged serial killer. The action comes a day after Manitoba chiefs announced the federal government will pay for a feasibility study for the potential search of another privately owned landfill. APTN's Liaison Sanders has more.
Protesters showed up with hand drums and voices raised, saying that they'll continue to blockade the Brady Road landfill until it is shut down. Organizers believe the remains of 3 Indigenous women are in the city's Brady Road landfill, not the privately run Prairie Green. Even with the pledge of support from the federal government, Morgan Harris's daughter Elle is skeptical.
But I doubt it's going to happen because it's the city. They're white, we're native, and they don't give a shit about us. They don't. If we have to keep coming out for these rallies and all these protesting, all this bull, and they're saying all this shit, that's obviously not going to happen. It's just, they say they care, but they don't. Because if they cared, we wouldn't have to be coming out for these rallies. We wouldn't have to be protesting about finding our mother's body. I bet you if she wasn't Native and she was white, they'd be looking for her right away.
Harris's cousin, meanwhile, echoed the calls to shut down the Brady landfill operated by the city.
They're continuing to dump there. There's garbage trucks going in and out every single day. Trash being thrown on our women. Trash being thrown on my cousin Morgan. She deserves so much better.
Yesterday, Police Chief Danny Smythe met with Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Grand Chief Kathy Merrick and Long Plains First Nations Chief Kira Wilson. A statement from the police service states, in part, Chief Smythe is supportive of the collaborative efforts of Chief Merrick to recover the remains of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron. The WPS will participate on a working committee led by Grand Chief Merrick on the feasibility of a recovery search. This morning, Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller reiterated the government's pledge to support the feasibility study, addressing reporters on Parliament Hill.
We're glad to deploy the resources the federal government can, including financial resources, to help with what will be a feasibility study, and we'll set the stages for the next conversations that we'll have with the families foremost in the search for closure.
In the meantime, the families of the victims and advocates like the Urban Warrior Alliance will continue blockades and protests at the landfills. Liaison Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
For more on the violence against Indigenous women in Winnipeg, we're joined by Angie Tuesday. She's the family liaison for the Winnipeg Police Service and deals directly with families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Angie, thanks for being with us. It's been a rough couple of weeks with the news that 4 Indigenous women have been murdered by an alleged serial killer. Can you tell us about your role as the family liaison for the Winnipeg Police?
So my role with the families is to essentially provide support to families and some advocacy in terms of connecting them with police investigative units, connecting them with outside resources, providing them with some support while they're going through this tremendous loss.
Has those conversations, I guess, been difficult this time around, given where we're at in terms of the relationship with the Indigenous peoples and the police at this point? Mm-hmm.
I can tell you it's always difficult, right? Because you're meeting people at a point where they're going through a tremendous shock and a huge loss to their family system. I can tell you that with what's been happening recently in Winnipeg and in Manitoba is, I'm finding that there's been a lot of community supports that are providing these additional wraparound services to families. But it's a situation that impacts us all. It impacts the family that's currently having lost a loved one. It's impacting other families of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit folks. It's impacting the people who are providing, on-the-ground supports. It's impacting, investigators. It's impacting the community as a whole. So each case is very difficult because, grief is a traumatic time for people. But this particular situation that's happening in Winnipeg has been, far-reaching in terms of the impacts.
Are you comfortable sharing your thoughts on the refusal to search the landfill and the Police Services Board saying it's up to Indigenous peoples to figure it out?
Mm-hmm. I can say that I feel for the families and how that decision must have impacted them, and I've seen it because I've been able to walk a little bit of that journey with them, and it's something that weighs on us. It's something that I wouldn't want to be in the position to have to make a decision like that, and I just feel for the families. I think that's all I can really say on that.
This is difficult work that you do that clearly has an impact on you. Mm-hmm. Well, why was this a role that you wanted to take on? It's kind of a long story. So when I was 16, I lost my sister to violence. She was a victim of a domestic homicide. And so, at that point, I became a spokesperson for my family and advocating for my family. I've been through that court process, although in a different way from other families, right? But that's led me to this road of supporting other families who are going through loss, supporting other families through the court process. And I think I bring that, my own personal experience, with me to the table, because although each of us have different specific experience, it's a shared experience, having gone through loss and grief and losing someone to violence in this way. So that's what's brought me here. I also know that there's a need for my position within the police service, and I think there's a desire for those investigators in those different units to be able to learn more about the role that I play, learn more about how I connect with communities and engage with families, in hopes of improving their own relationships later on. I think there's a big interest and a need, definitely, for that to continue. Angie, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate you sharing and joining us today in the work that you do. You can watch an extended version of our interview with Angie Tuesday over on our APTN News YouTube page. The Standing Committee on the Status of Women released a report on violence committed against Indigenous women by workers in the resource industry. The report is specific about why such violence shouldn't be happening, but vague on what consequences there are for companies whose employees perpetrate the violence. APTN's Fraser Needham has that story.
There appears to be consensus amongst all the federal parties in Canada. Violence against Indigenous women near resource extraction projects needs to stop immediately.
How powerful it is that in light of the ongoing genocide against Indigenous women and girls, that our committee was able to work together unanimously to send a clear message that violence against all women, including the kinds of violence being endured by Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people, who are residing particularly close to resource extraction must end.
But how to prevent violence against Indigenous women is up for debate. Conservative MP Michelle Ferrari suggests profitable mining companies should be left alone to police themselves.
We know that resource extraction is the #1 employer. So, and I think to my colleagues' comments, this isn't about whether or not resource extraction is good or bad. We do have different opinions on that. But I think we all agree that education and consultation and protecting people is at the core of it. And I don't know any businesses or corporate responsibility that wouldn't want to be a part of that.
The report mentions the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples a number of times, but it also states the primacy of provincial rights in resource development projects, and how resource companies have often ignored the UNDRIP's commitment to free, prior, and informed consent that has led to the continued violence. But when asked, Conservative Committee Chair Karen Vecchio showed no appetite to discuss what should happen to these companies that continue to ignore Indigenous rights.
A violent-free Canada, a violent-free community is exactly where we need to go. So with all the questions that you're asking about UNDRIP, I recognize where you're coming, but I look at this very specifically, that when it comes regarding the violence, that there has to be a no-holds-barred, that we cannot allow this to happen.
Liberal MP Sonia Sidhu had this to add.
You know, there should be zero tolerance, and we did all unanimously. Beside the partisan, we all came together. So that is why the recommendations there, and the government is committed to do, and we'll continue to do that work. So there should be no violence, no women and girls, except what happened in the last week in Manitoba.
But when it comes to ongoing violence against Indigenous women as the result of resource development projects, what should and what does often happen appear to be two very different things. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
It's been 2 years since the Yukon released its response to the National Inquiry's report into missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit Plus people in Canada. Now it has a new document in place that will further guide the territory in its mission to end the violence once and for all. Our reporter Sarah Connors has that story.
On Tuesday, the Yukon government unveiled a new document detailing priorities for its strategy on missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit Plus people.
We witnessed so much horrific violence to our Indigenous women.
The document builds on the territory's MMIWG2S Plus strategy released in December of 2020. It includes 12 priority actions the territory will focus on, such as community safety and affordable housing. 2 new actions are also included, like improving communication and transportation services across the territory. Yukon Advisory Committee co-chair Anne Maja Rader says it can be dangerous for women to travel between communities because there's no safe ride options.
We're about looking at what's out there, what do we have, and hopefully put something in place so that'll provide more safety.
Jeannie McLean is the committee's co-chair and the minister responsible for the Women and Gender Equity Directorate. She says the strategy is intended to be a living document and will change as the committee's work progresses.
We wanted to build a strategy that was long and enduring, that would endure the test of time, and that it would be a living document that we could bring back and review and hold all governments accountable.
The committee will complete a joint implementation plan which will be unveiled next year. All actions in the document are expected to be completed within 15 years.
What do I want to see in 15 years? Wow. You know, the ending of violence against our Indigenous women.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Carcross.
Back to Ottawa now, where the Trudeau government has introduced legislation that seeks to address some of the remaining inequities for First Nations registration and membership under the Indian Act. The government says Bill C-38 will make legislative amendments to the Act to tackle such areas as enfranchisement and individual deregistration. It's estimated as many as 3,500 people could be eligible to apply for status registration under the proposed changes. Here's what Indigenous Services Canada Minister Patty Haidu had to say.
The Indian Act is a colonial piece of legislation, and while some changes have been made, more are necessary. Bill C-38 seeks to ensure First Nations individuals with family histories of enfranchisement are entitled to registration under the Indian Act and can pass this on to their descendants to the same degree as those families without histories of enfranchisement.
And all new Sports with Stranger is on the other side of this commercial break. This week, Daryl speaks with a member of the Florida Panthers. That's coming up. Stick around. Welcome back. Brandon Montour is one of only 6 Indigenous players currently playing in the NHL. The Florida Panthers defenseman from Six Nations of the Grand River in Ontario spoke with our Daryl Stranger about his season so far, how lacrosse played a big part in where he's at today, and why giving back to Indigenous youth is so important to him.
So I'm here with Florida Panthers defenseman Brandon Montour. Brandon, thanks for taking some time with us today. So we're here talking about a bit of the Brian Trottier APTN Most Valuable Indigenous Player Award. And, I mean, you just got the stick for the first time. You saw it in your hands and held it, right? So, I mean, the award just really epitomizes a lot of work off the ice as well as on the ice. So, I mean, just what does it mean for you to be recognized with that award?
It's huge. I think, I take pride, like I said earlier, off the ice. Obviously, the work, that I put on the ice, that's what people see. But, a lot of people don't know that, I take pride in, going to different areas, around Canada or the U.S. If I have time in the summers, and, just checking in and seeing how different reserves, are, different kids. And then I have, a golf tournament back home that me and one of my good buddies back home have. And, we just try to get back to the community as much as we can. Obviously, what they have given us, in our careers and our life, we like to give that back or as much as we can.
Well, and why is that so important to you to go around, not only just in your community, but I mean, you've been up to the Yukon, right? Like, I mean, you go everywhere. Why is that so important to you?
Oh, it's a cool experience. Obviously you get different lifestyles. I've had, obviously everything I needed as a kid with my 2 parents. I have 2 brothers as well, and we, got everything. And a lot of these places, especially up north in the Yukon, like you were saying, a lot of the kids don't have much, or they didn't even have an arena. They had like they kind of made as much as they can, with no ice, and
just a place to run around.
Pretty much, and that's, experience things like that, and you talk to these kids and see what their, how their lives are, or what you can help in ways, that they might not understand now, but in the future. And anytime I can give back in that way and have a chance to travel like that in the summers, I definitely do that.
And you're one of, I think it's 6 Indigenous NHL players in the NHL right now. Number seems kind of low if you think about it, and all the great skilled players that are out there that are Indigenous. What do you think could maybe be done to bring that number up, even just a few in the next few years?
Yeah, I don't know if it's, my experience, even from back home, there's a lot of talented players that can't get out of their comfort zone. I think that could be an issue. But I don't know. I think it's one of those things where, you get a chance to go play or leave home, or experience different leagues, or competitive leagues where you might not be the best player, and you might not be used to that. And I think that's just the big thing, is kind of trying to get that experience. Personally, I got that as a young age, and every place I played and every level, I just kept improving and getting better. And I think that's a big thing that young kids can learn.
And we can't leave here without talking a little bit about lacrosse. You were a big lacrosse player. How big of a role did that play, do you think, in sort of the player you are right now?
Huge. Obviously, conditioning. I was drafted by Anaheim and played that following summer lacrosse. I couldn't give it up, but a lot of the skills that I have today that I played, in hockey, translate definitely into lacrosse. And lacrosse was a big thing, and probably a big factor of, where I am now.
Well, we'll leave it there, Brandon, but I want to say a big thank you, MMIWG2S, to you for taking some time with us.
Appreciate it.
Good luck the rest of the year.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good stuff. Assembly of First Nations National Chief Roseanne Archibald is on Nation to Nation tonight, right after the news. We've got a preview for you after the break. Welcome back. Let's take a look now at our photo of the day, which comes to us courtesy of Neil McCauley. Neil's photo is almost like a painting of a stunning sunset, maybe somewhere in the prairies or the far north. When you send your photos to share@aptn.ca, don't forget to include as many details as possible. We sure do appreciate it. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, +3 in Halifax, cloudy and 1 above in Charlottetown. 8 below in Kuujjuaq, -4 for Nain. +1 with snow in Montreal, 3 below in Chibougamau. +1 with snow in Sault Ste. Marie, flurries and -1 in North Bay. Snow and +1 for Thunder Bay, -1 and snow in Sioux Lookout. 11 below in God's Lake, snow and -16 for Norway House. -2 with snow in Winnipeg, 9 below with snow in Dauphin. Snow and -17 for Regina, -15 with flurries in Saskatoon, -15 in La Ronge, 20 below in Stony Rapids. In northern Alberta, -21 with snow in Fort Chip, 11 below and flurries in Fort Mac. -1 with snow in Edmonton, 4 below in Lethbridge. +4 in Vancouver, cloudy and 5 for Victoria. -7 with snow in Prince George, 8 below in Smithers. -28 in Old Crow, 39 below in Mayo. -19 with snow in Yellowknife, 21 below in Norman Wells. -21 and snow for Sax Harbor, flurries and 19 below in Paulituck. -27 in Whale Cove, 21 below in Baker Lake. -20 with snow in Resolute, 17 below and flurries in Igloo Lake. It's Thursday, and that means another episode of Nation to Nation is coming up. Here's a peek of what to expect.
Ani, I'm Annette Francis. Tonight we'll hear from the Assembly of First Nations National Chief to talk about the results from the recent gathering and some of the issues at her headquarters. We'll get the lowdown on the child welfare compensation deal being worked out with the federal government. And with the growing environmental concerns, we'll hear about a new National First Nation Guardian Network. That's coming up after the news.
Thanks, Annette. You can watch that entire episode of Nation to Nation in just a few moments' time. That is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. Of course, for much more, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Mina Kawapamitten. Stick around for Nation to Nation. Have a great night.